What's going on, everybody? This is MaxTheCatfish, and today I've got a video that is going to show you 3 different designs for a hypertube elevator inside of your factory. These are 3 out of many different designs, but my hope is that this could probably give you a little bit of inspiration for how to design some elevators inside of your factory to move from floor to floor. Let's get right into it. So, to start, I want to set down a few structural standards that I have for my bases. And the biggest one that you'll see in all 3 of these designs is that all of our floors are the exact same height. All of our floors are 4 walls tall. And why I do this is because the 4 wall height is actually pretty all-inclusive of most of the buildings you're going to get in the game. That includes your foundries, that includes your manufacturers, even fit under here as well. Most of the buildings in the game are going to fit under 4 walls tall, with the exception of stuff like your refineries, right? Refineries are massive. These guys actually probably are, 8 walls tall, I think. And so the beauty of this is that if you wanted to build a refinery inside of one of your factories with this standard in place, you can just take the floor off of your first floor, easy, and fit your refineries right in here with almost no trouble. You can do that if you'd like to. But all of our buildings here, all of our factories, and all of our designs are based on the fact that every single one of our floors is exactly 4 walls tall. So let's take a look at the first design here. This is a design where you can build an elevator that integrates with a staircase that wraps itself around a pillar. One really cool thing that I learned when Update 3 released is that the pillar foundations actually fit perfectly inside of a staircase. They fit awesome. It's really nice and snug. And the best part of that is if you ever have to use the staircase, it prevents you from falling through to the bottom. If you've ever used a staircase in the game, you've probably accidentally fallen through when you were trying to ascend. If you put a pillar in the middle of it, it fixes that issue instantly. It's really nice. Now, this design is sort of a hub-based design. What I mean by that is you have a single floor that connects to all of your other floors. So from your hub floor, I'm going to consider this my first floor or my hub floor, I am able to go to any of the other floors in my base. If I jump in through this hypertube, it's going to bring me up to, I think this one brings me all the way up to the top floor of my base. And if I jump back into the hypertube, I'm brought back to my hub floor. And this is really good design for those style of bases where you have a single floor that you come back to over and over and over again. This is your floor probably with your hub, with your MAM, with your awesome shop, all of those things that you need to visit often in the game. So the pro of this is that you can easily access any of the floors inside of your base without having to go from floor to floor to floor, right? Now, one of the negatives of this style is that the way that I have set this up is you can only really have a maximum of 4 floors connected, right? Your main floor and 3 other floors. And why that is because I try to build this with minimal clipping. You'll notice that inside here, when I take this wall off, none of these hypertubes are clipping through the staircase. And if I were to add one here, it would clip, which is why this is sort of limited to 4 floors of a factory. And so you can use this in a 4-floor factory if you'd like to. Now, you might be asking, well, how do you build this? What's going on with this clipping? And actually, it's because the hypertubes and pipes in the game can clip through any object in the game. So if I take this hypertube as an example, I have placed down my wall hole and my hypertube entrance. And in order to connect it, I can place down my pillars first and then connect up my hypertube. So I connect my hypertube here, and I walk up my staircase, or I fly in this case, all the way up to the floor that this needs to connect to, and I connect it up. And you can do this because the hypertubes can clip through pretty much any object. You'll actually see examples of this in my base on Twitch when we're working with fluids. I have our fluid pipes clip through the floors, those glass foundations, and it keeps your factories really nice and clean. And you can do this as well with hypertubes. And so this keeps a really nice and clean factory and no clipping. In fact, if you go through the staircase, you'll notice that there's no clipping here with the hypertube and the staircase here. You can just walk down these stairs without any worry of bumping into hypertubes. Really nice design, limited to 4 floors, but it allows you to have a hub floor that connects to every other floor in your factory. So to set up this design, it's actually relatively simple. If we just take the walls and some of this power out of the way, because you can really figure this stuff out on your own, what this looks like is a bunch of staircases stacked on top of each other. And many of you know you can actually stack staircases in one of two ways. You can stack them like this, which is the way that most people do it, is something that looks like this, right? But I actually have taken to stacking them a little bit differently. I like stacking them in this way. And one of the reasons for that is because you actually afford yourself a little bit more room on the ground floor here. You'll notice that we get a little bit of clipping here, but it's almost sort of hidden. It's out of the way underneath the staircase. What I can't do is I can't put a hypertube wall hole on this side of the staircase because it would clip those stairs. You wouldn't be able to use the staircase normally. It's a level of clipping that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with. But you can set up the staircase in either of the two ways that you want to. I just find that this stacking looks a little bit better. And of course, before you actually have hooked up your hypertubes, you will have had to build this pillar. And something that some of you may not have tried before is these pillars fit perfectly inside the staircase. You can just place them down right in the middle and it prevents you from falling through. It's really neat. Now, with all of this set up and with your wall holes set up and your hypertube entrances set up, it's as simple as connecting your hypertube to one end and then connecting it to the next floor. And you've got your connection. Remember, the hypertubes can clip through these objects completely freely, and so do the pipes. So it is as simple as that. And then surrounding these with your frame windows, etc., etc. One thing worth noting is you should probably keep track of which floor each one of your hypertubes connects to when you're setting it up. It might be easier for you to actually start from the doorway and say that this doorway connects to your second floor, and then the next hypertube connects to your third floor, and the next hypertube connects to your fourth floor. And that way you can just keep it straight in your mind exactly which entrance on your main floor connects to which floor. It's an easy way of keeping track of that kind of stuff. And then put your walls down, connect your power, of course, to each one of your hypertube entrances, and you're good to go. All right, so design number 2. This is very similar to our first design, but it's got one major difference, which is instead of a single floor connecting to all other floors, we have a sort of stepping stone pattern where I can jump into a hypertube on any floor and go up one floor. And then I can come around here and jump into another hypertube and go up one floor again. And I, of course, can jump back down here and yeet myself off the edge. You should probably have some foundation here, but you can move from floor to floor to floor like a stepping stone. It's faster than using the staircase. Of course, I like having the staircase in my factory because I like having an alternative way of going up and down, especially if I'm afraid that my power grid blows. These hypertubes aren't going to work. So I keep the staircase integrated in there as a backup just in case, but this design allows you to go from floor to floor to floor, one at a time. And I always know that the hypertube to the right of my door is going to bring me up one floor, and the hypertube on the opposite side of my door is going to bring me down one floor. Now, one thing that I've added to this design to make it a little bit easier and maybe more accessible is I have added a floor to ceiling tube as well. This is a sort of shortcut to bring me all the way to the top of my elevator. And I can ride this hypertube all the way up to the top and know that I can bypass all of those floors, right? If I need to go from the bottom floor to the top floor, this is the fastest way of doing it. But there's a small problem with the way that the hypertubes connect, and that is this last hypertube on the top has to be one click lower than normal. And it's because the hypertube just doesn't reach the normal height. It's such a huge bummer. If they gave us just one tiny little centimeter more of hypertube length, we could actually connect this up in a very even way. But you'll notice that unlike our first design, this hypertube elevator system, if you use that bypass, allows you to have a total of 7 full floors. You could have an infinite number of floors with this design, frankly, because each floor connects to the floor above it. You can just go from floor to floor to floor infinitely. You could scale this up infinitely if you'd like to. I haven't done that here, but it is an option, and it's a pretty good option. I really like this one. It's nice and clean, and these first two options use up a very small amount of space. You'll notice this only uses up a single foundation. That is great for these factories that maybe you want to use this as a structural element. You could use this to make it look like your factory is being supported. Instead of using pillars, you could create these staircases with hypertube elevators and have some really easy ways of getting around your base from floor to floor. Setting up this design is just as simple as the design prior to it. It's almost identical, with the difference that, of course, you don't have this hub at the bottom with multiple hypertube entrances. You just have the one that's going to bring you to the floor above, and you've got your one that's going to bring you all the way up to the top floor. If we, again, take a look at the insides of this and just tear this apart, how you set this up is, of course, you set up your walls, your wall holes, and then you connect your hypertube from the right side of your doorway to the hypertube entrance on the opposite side of your doorway. Remember that this is your go up a floor side, and this one is your go down a floor side, and you're good to go. You just keep doing this infinitely all the way up. And like I mentioned, for your bypass hypertube, the one that brings you all the way up to the top, when you connect this hypertube and you place that wall hole at the very top, you just have to place this down 1 pip. If you don't do that, it does not reach. It's so close, but it doesn't. So if I just go ahead and show that, we would connect this hypertube up from our ground floor all the way up here, and it just barely does not reach to the hypertube. Just barely. Even on the inside, this does not work. So you got to lower that down. Functionally exactly the same, but it's going to look a little bit different than your other floors. That's all. One thing worth showing for both of these is that you'll notice that to get power from one floor to another, I actually clip the power line through the floor using these wall power poles. You'll see these, the cable coming up here from floor to floor. It does clip through the foundation. You can do this too, just like you can the pipes and the hypertubes, but it's relatively clean and pretty minimal in the distraction that it has to your base. I actually really like this to be able to transport power from floor to floor. The one qualm I have with these two designs is that the power cable that connects from your wall outlet to your hypertube entrance clips through the wall. I try to ignore this, but if you can come up with an easier, better way of transferring power, perhaps on the inside of this container, that would make things even cleaner than I've set them up here. Now, that brings us to our last example, and this is the example that I've implemented on my stream. It is very different from the first two examples. You may have been eyeing it in the background while we were going from example to example here. And this example elevator, I love this design. So when we take a look at our first design here, right, we were saying that we had a floor that could connect to any other floor, but those other floors couldn't connect to each other. In our second example, we had floors where you could go up a floor and down a floor, but you couldn't go from any floor to any other floor. That was its biggest limitation. But this one scaled up infinitely if you really wanted it to. Our last example is the best of both worlds, in my opinion, and it allows you an elevator that connects any floor of your factory to any other floor of your factory in a uniform fashion, and I freaking love it. Now, with one limitation, which is you'll notice it here, it can only connect 6 floors at a time. Each one of these hypertubes represents a different floor, and I'm going to show you how to build this in a second, but I'm going to show you first the functionality of it. If we're on the first floor here, what we have are 6 hypertubes that lead to our 6 floors. And I've actually marked on top of each hypertube which floor each one of these leads to. So our first floor, obviously, we're on it. So we've blocked this off with a pipe wall hole to make it look like we blocked it off and prevented you from going to it. And each of these other floors is floors 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if I want to go to floor 3, I jump in this hypertube here, and I'm on floor 3. And I came out of this first tube, but we are on floor 3 here. And what that means is on floor 3, if I want to go back to floor 1, I know that it's the first hypertube. Jump into that, whoop, and we're back on our bottom floor. And the best part about this design is while there is clipping, the clipping looks intentional and it's super clean. You'll notice when we jump into our floor 6 hypertube here and go up, we've got clipped pipes here, but they're all merging together to bring you to the 6th floor. And here we are. It's so nice. And I'm going to show you how to build this because the building of it is a little bit complex to get it right. I'll show you how to build this right now. First, I'm mixing it up here with the windows. I'm going to actually use this big wall window that I don't use very often in my base, but it looks really nice for this design. And we are going to put these at the entrance to our elevator on each floor. You'll notice that one of the facets of this design is that all these wall holes are equidistant from their nearest one. So we can place technically a hypertube wall hole in between each one of these, and that means you've set it up correctly. So we've got the basis, right? We've got our 4 floors that should be connected, and we've got 4 wall holes on each floor. Now, on our first floor, we want to travel to the second floor, and because there's 4 of these, we want to make sure that we keep them straight. So I recommend you go from left to right, and each one of these holes represents first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. So second floor wall hole, we need to go from the first floor to the second floor. We want to connect this tube. So I'm going to take my hypertube from the back here, and I'm going to connect it to the leftmost tube of the second floor, because that is going to be the tube that brings us down to the first floor, right? This is our second floor, and we know it goes to the second floor because it's the second wall hole. So then next, I want to connect this to the third floor. We just go 1 to the left and connect this up to floor 3. And that is what most of the elevator is actually going to look like. So we now have connected the first floor to the second floor, third floor, and fourth floor. And eventually I'm going to hook up the entrances. But before I do that, I want to hook up the other floors. So of course, on our second floor, we can go down to the first floor already. We've got that hooked up, but we need to go from the second floor to the third floor and from the second floor to the fourth floor. So I'm going to skip this wall hole because we're on floor 2. We're going to skip the second wall hole. And instead, we're going to connect the third wall hole to the second entrance on the third floor. So we go from floor 2 to floor 3. That's why we connect on floor 3 to the second wall hole. This brings us down to the second floor. And we only have one more connection to make. That is our third floor to the fourth floor. So on our third floor, again, looking at our wall holes, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. We're connecting the fourth floor. Let's connect the hypertube from floor 3 to floor 4 in the third hypertube space. 1, 2, 3, we go down to the third floor. I'm going to set up the entrances. This part takes a little bit of time, so I'm going to fast forward through this, but I'll set up each one of the entrances, and you'll notice that I'm going to connect the power inside of the elevator. And because I'm doing this so that we have a little bit less clipping with our power. There you go. And now really quickly, I can say, hey, I want to jump up to floor 3. Let's jump in here. We fly past floor 2 and end up on floor 3. And then I say, actually, I meant to go to floor 2. We jump in here and we're on, okay, well, we're on floor 1, but where that would have landed us if I had placed some more foundations is up here. And we can tell it's floor 2 because our pipeline wall hole is blocked off. Now, you can obviously place all of these pips on each floor, so you know exactly on each floor where things are taking you. This is our floor 3 and our floor 4, etc., on each of the other floors. And it's just a really quick way of getting to where you're going. Now, why do I like this design so much? Other than the fact that it's really nice and neat, is that right now we're only connected to 4 floors, but we can very easily add more. And we do that by extending our elevator outwards to the right here. So I'm actually going to take down that wall that I just placed, and I'm going to say, hey, 4 floors wasn't enough for this factory. I want 6 floors. It's important that we have 6 floors. And I'm going to extend these walls out like this and like this. And now I'm going to duplicate this design for floors 5 and 6. And again, I'm going to use this little pip to say, here's floor 5, like you'd see it on a die, and here's floor 6. A little bit of board games integrated into my Satisfactory. I freaking love it. And now I've got to set up floors 5 and 6, right? So let's go up and do the same thing for each of the floors. And voila, there it is, all finished, all ready to go. 6 floors all connected to one another using a single elevator. Now, the one thing that this design is missing is a staircase, but I think it looks really nice if you create a staircase on the side, just like you did here. So you can still implement that option. Just create a bunch of window walls that add up here, and you get the best of both worlds. You get a staircase on the side of your elevator that runs all the way up, just like it does on our other example. And that way, just in case your power runs out and you want an easy way up into or between floors, you've got it there. Don't forget to put your wall pillars in here, because trust me, you're going to fall through this thing a bunch if you end up taking the stairs like I have. I consider myself pretty good at the minute details of moving around, but man, I fall through these staircases all the time. But that's it. Hope this video was helpful, getting you starting to think about how you could use some elevators in your factories. If it was, don't forget to drop a like. Let me know down in the comments if you plan to use one of these elevators, which one you're planning on using. Or if you have a completely different design, what design are you using in your factories to get from floor to floor? Let me know down there. Don't forget to subscribe for some more satisfactory tips and tricks, and I will catch you guys in our next video or live on Twitch. Talk to you guys soon.